He jerked off in front of his brother, and he got punished for it.
What the hell did we just watch, you guys? This episode of Severance completely caught me off guard. I've rewatched it multiple times trying to piece it all together, and I think I've cracked the code. And yes, you guessed it, this episode was another mind control tactic from Lumon, a way to tame the Innie's tempers and pull them in even deeper into the Eagan cult. The outdoor trek and the new Kier Eagan doctrine about his twin Dieter, it all ties back to Ricken's book, The You Are. Lumon manipulates Ricken's philosophy to fit their purpose, and just like a severed person becomes two, an Innie and an outie, the book itself now has two versions, one that inspires rebellion and one that demands conformity. With the reveal of the Glasgow block, the weird Innie clone people, Mark and Helly hooking up, Irving's creepy dream, there's so much to unravel from this episode, guys, so buckle up. Without further ado, let's break it down. The Innies wake up to an outdoor retreat and team-building occurrence, otherwise known as an ORTBO. Their mission, to walk the path of Kier Eagan to the sacred place Woe's Hollow, where Kier first tamed the four tempers. On the way, they will uncover a new piece of Eagan's doctrine, a fourth appendix telling of the story of Kier's twin brother Dieter. The Innie's journey mirrors a religious pilgrimage, much like how the Christians walk the path of Jesus' crucifixion in Jerusalem.
Stray not from Kier's path, lest you royal nature's wrath.
They are led by strange, clone-like versions of themselves, symbolic, like the paintings of Milchek in Kier's image. These clones are meant to be the Innie's twins, like in the story of Kier and Dieter. The Innies find the fourth appendix, and as soon as they start reading from the book, it's pretty obvious this is written in Ricken's style.
He beseeched me to take to the wood with him to live as paupers.
He'll be shipped off to the gulag like an errant pauper.
As he spilt his lineage upon the soil.
That a grim and intrusive resentment of my parents, my lineage,
and told each other rhyming jokes till our gullets ached.
Even coming from my own oafish gullet.
The ORTBO mirrors a hike Ricken and his wife Devon took with Mark and Gemma, whom in the book he dubs as Flip and Nan. They go up a mountain overlooking a lake, just like what we see with the Innies. The purpose of Ricken's journey ended up being an awakening for him, coming to the revelation about human social structure after he stumbled upon a beehive and became fascinated watching the bees.
How like human beings they are.
He came to the conclusion that the working class is the most important part of a thriving society.
They themselves are the most vital appendage of the greater organism or hive that is mankind.
Sound familiar?
Should you tame the tempers as I did mine, then the world shall become but your appendage.
Lumon agrees with Ricken's observation, but they take it a step further. To rule the world, you must control, you must tame the working class. And so, the same material from Ricken that once sparked rebellion is now rewritten for indoctrination. But there was something deeper, more meaningful that came of Ricken's journey that might not be as obvious, and I think it was finding his muse, his true love.
I tried to give voice to these sentiments later that evening. Only Nan listened intently, noting the wisdom of the analogy and adding ideas of her own.
The more I look back, the more hints I see of Ricken's love for Gemma.
Of course, the baby's middle name could have been so lovely a tribute to her.
Here, Nan and I read passages from Dr. Zhivago. It was a rare moment of spiritual quiet in a deafening world.
Ricken fondly recalls how he and Gemma bonded over the quotes from this book, a novel set during the Russian Revolution, critiquing communism and the loss of individuality. Now, this book is basically the plot of Severance. The main character, Zhivago, is torn between two loves, his wife from before the war, Gemma, and his new love he met during the revolution, Helly. The book's characters also have multiple names representing different versions of themselves, like the Innie and outie. And let's not forget, Soviet Russia promised freedom through communism, just as Lumon promises freedom through Severance. Both instead created control, not liberation. The novel illustrates how love and passion are ultimately smothered by the oppressive grip of communism, leading to a tragic ending where the protagonist dies alone. But it's pretty interesting this is the book Gemma and Ricken discuss.
Mark's late wife Gemma was an educator as well, Russian literature.
Gemma is an expert in this area, and it seems like Ricken learned from her. She inspired his revelation about the bees, helped him refine his thoughts. And the bees are a commentary on communism, with the queen controlling the entire hive, symbolizing a society where individuality is suppressed and all serve the greater cause. I think Ricken took a lot more from Gemma than we realize. He's a Timu version of her, trying his best to sound as an intellectual, but ultimately he's a fake. And when you go back and listen to some of the original Eagan doctrine, the way Milchek and Kobel speak, even the propaganda cartoon shown in the beginning of the season, all of which supposedly happened before Natalie went to commission Ricken's work, it's all the same style and ideology. We know Gemma is important to Lumon, and I think her knowledge and ideas are part of why. Now, many believe the show is inspired by the Greek myth of Orpheus and Eurydice, where a man descends into the underworld to bring his dead wife back. This parallels Mark's journey as he digs deeper into Lumon to uncover the truth about Gemma. But an interesting thing about the myth is that Eurydice's death was indirectly caused by a man named Aristaeus, a beekeeper who chased her out of desire, leading to a fatal snake bite. So if Mark is Orpheus and Gemma is Eurydice, could Ricken be Aristaeus? The bee connection feels too obvious to ignore. And Ricken was obsessed with Gemma. Maybe she was trying to get away from him when she crashed, or maybe he has ties to Lumon. Either way, I think he has a deeper connection to her than he's admitted so far. In Ricken's book, we also learn of a psychological strategy that Lumon is using in the form of the ORTBO.
Repetition and subversion is a stratagem long employed in military circles. The basic notion is that one sets up a pattern, repeating it enough times as to lull one's enemy or reader into a sense of calm before breaking it suddenly and dramatically.
This concept plays out in two ways. Every day, the Innies follow the same pattern, wake up in the elevator and go play their little MDR game. But then suddenly out of nowhere, they're waking up in the freezing cold and told they're going on a journey. And it's not just the change in their routine. There's also this dramatic shift in the Eagan story, introducing a new doctrine and a surprise twin of the legendary Kier Eagan. So why all of a sudden is Lumon enlisting this strategy? Why are they shaking things up? Well, in Ricken's book, he uses this as a way to ensure the reader remembers a poem of his called Destiny. By randomly inserting the poem and disrupting the flow of the book, it sort of forces an alertness in the reader, ensuring they absorb his message. With the ORTBO, Lumon too is ensuring the Innies get the message. For example, the new break room and the propaganda cartoon they were shown before, it was all in typical Lumon fashion. The Innies were suspect from the get, and there was no way their minds would be open to receiving and actually believing the bullshit from that cartoon.
You see, I've spent the first 4 chapters of this book, plus intro, setting a pattern. You may have placed in my path an emotional block. Only through a sudden obliteration of the form was I able to bypass this and seeding the theme directly into your id.
And not to get too meta, but with this episode, the showrunners are also employing this strategy on us, the viewers. So now that we understand why the ORTBO and the weird new Dieter Eagan story, what is the theme Lumon is seeding into the Innie's id? Well, let's look closer at Appendix 4 of Kier Eagan. I was a little shook when I first watched this episode, I'm not gonna lie. The way it's written is kind of graphic with a lot of attention to Dieter's Peter. In a nutshell, it's a coming-of-age story. Dieter convinces Kier to reject conformity and go live wild and reckless in the woods where they can explore their identity and newfound sexuality. Dieter is a metaphor, an embodiment of teenage angst, and in the end of the story, Dieter dies after being drowned at Woe's Hollow, essentially becoming one of the 4 tempers, Woe. The sexual urges, the rebelling against authority, these things become what represents woe and are painted as shameful, as a flaw in human nature that must be tamed. And I think you can also look at woe as sadness of the loss of a part of a person's identity, a part of their nature that's forced to be suppressed.
You have followed the path of Kier and Dieter and reached Woe's Hollow. You stand upon sacred earth.
Milchek calls Woe's Hollow a sacred place, adding a religious layer to the Eagan narrative. The story parallels rituals like baptism, where sins are washed away to begin a new, purified life. It also mirrors crucifixion and sacrifice. Just as Jesus died for the sins of humanity, Dieter's death serves as a sacrifice for Kier's vision. The moral of the story? The message Lumon wants to ensure the Innies get is to conform, repress natural desires to sin, and walk the path of Kier. Be as Kier Eagan deems you should be. Now, the story of Dieter is actually Ricken's coming-of-age story from the UUR. As an adolescent, Ricken saw sexuality and nonconformity as sinful and depraved because of the shame he felt about his birth and his parents' lifestyle.
I am the youngest son of renowned performance artists Bob and Grace Hale, known collectively as Hump Dumpster. Both my conception and birth took place in a small theater behind a defunct perfumery in Western Oregon, as part of a 9-month performance art piece originated by my parents titled Smells Like Afterbirth, Fucker.
His parents were basically extreme hippies living like Dieter, rebellious and rejecting societal norms. Ricken describes their lifestyle as art and likens it to a sibling, just as Dieter is portrayed as Kier's twin.
You see, with time I came to understand that my parents hadn't chosen art over me. Rather, they had made art my brother.
Eventually, Ricken embraces his brother, Art, embraces his sexuality and his nonconformist feelings, seeing them as a path to individuality and finding the true you are. Obviously, Lumon didn't like that message, and so we have a slightly different ending to the story. Within the moral of Lumon's Dieter story, sex is demonized, and Ricken oftentimes echoes this sentiment in his book, describing it as taboo, ugly or foul, wicked, and shameful. I mean, look at how his birth was described as
a Baroque deconstruction of the increasingly perverse human urge to procreate.
Ricken's quote critiques the entire process of procreation, dating, finding love, having sex, giving birth, and creating a family as overly complicated, extravagant, and morally questionable. I think this description also hints at Lumon's vision for the future of humanity. If their end goal is mind transfers into new bodies, how will they supply those bodies? In my last video, I talked about my theory on how the goats might be used to sever maternal and paternal instincts. The mammalion's nurturable department raises the goats as babies, and then I believe they are forced to slaughter them once grown. Lumon wants to sever the connection between humans and parenthood. Instead of natural reproduction, severed people will be used as incubators to grow new bodies.
What are you saying, Natalie, to the woman who became pregnant at work less than a month after her company went severed?
The senator and his wife are a perfect example. She gets severed to avoid the pregnancy experience, right? And while initially this might seem like a choice because, let's face it, pregnancy can suck and it can be very hard on some women. I realize, though, that this actually hints at something much darker and more sinister.
Sex, it turned out, was not simply an act of debauchery. It was the primary method of human reproduction. There is virtually no one alive, I learned, who was not sired through the physical act of love.
Sex is necessary for creating new humans, but when it's tied to love, maternal bonds, and personal connections, it threatens the cult of Eagan. These connections give people a greater purpose above Kier Eagan, something Lumon can't control. Dieter represents freedom, sex, love, and his death is a warning. Do not stray from the path of Eagan. Kier and Dieter, Ricken and Art, the Innies and their twins. They all represent a duality of a person, a good side and a bad side, light versus dark. In Lumon's story, Kier chooses the light side, and Ricken, he chooses his dark side. It's no coincidence that Milchek is dressed in all white and positions himself above the Innies like some prophet. He, of course, is on the good heavenly side, the side that conforms to Kier's cult. The 20s also represent the good side, like Milchek positioned up above. It's the Innies at their best, in their MDR attire leading the way to the path of Kier. And on the flip side, the Innies themselves are dressed in all black, positioned below Milchek and their twins. They are Dieter, the dark side, the little hellions, rebels who convince themselves to escape from the severed floor, like Dieter escaping off into the wood.
In infancy, he was my bosom friend, but as we blossomed into boyhood, he beseeched me to take to the wood with him to live as paupers.
Ricken and Kier's stories both center on adolescence and the awakening that comes along with it. Puberty, rebellion, questioning authority. In some of my previous videos, we've talked about how the Innies are inherently childlike, having yet to live through experiences that strip away a child's naivety and innocence. They are even treated like children by Lumon, as shown when their marshmallow treat gets taken away due to misbehaving. Petey also mentioned in Season 1 that his earliest Innie memories align with when he was 5, drawing a comparison between maturity levels based on how long an Innie has been alive.
My first day at Lumon's as far back as my 5th birthday, and with 2 pasts, it blurs the present too.
But our Innies are now basically the equivalent of teenagers. They've had a sexual, spiritual, philosophical awakening, are actively rebelling, and finding love and desire. This ORTBO is yet another manipulation tactic to control the Innies, and good luck trying to control some angsty teenagers. Wherever it is the Innies are at on this ORTBO, it seems to be a testing ground for Lumon's mind control tactics. The show seems to be hinting that this place might not be real, maybe some kind of simulation. I hope not though, because the Matrix twist is so played out. But there are a few weird things that make you go, For example, we hear the elevator ding as Irving wakes up in the middle of the lake. A TV stand also appears out of nowhere, and when playing the ORTBO video, it randomly glitches out. Those creepy twinnies that magically appear and point the way to the path. And is it just me, or did the echoes when Mark and Irving were shouting sound off?
What's happening? Where are we?
I have no fucking idea!
All of this is hard to ignore, right? I think that maybe they're in some kind of secret zone. Think Area 51, possibly the testing floor. That could explain why they let Irving wander off. He wasn't going to get very far. I think that this location is where Lumon tests their control of brainwaves. We get a clue about how Lumon might be doing this when we see Mark's reintegration.
The monitors differentiate the 5 brainwave frequencies of the Innie and Outie. Delta, theta, alpha, beta, gamma. 1 frequency, 2 waves per oscilloscope.
So imagine, if you will, the severed mind as a radio with 2 stations. When you're tuned into one station, you can also adjust the equalizer to change the vibe. The main goal of Severance isn't just creating 2 separate minds or stations, but to also control the equalizer, set the mood. For example, the beta brainwave frequency represents when you're excited, pumped up, so increasing beta is like turning up the bass. The delta and theta brainwave frequencies are like dream or hypnotic states that make the mind more receptive to suggestions, perfect for setting the mood, to metaphorically light the candles, dim the lights, and hit the sexy time playlist. Just like the description of Ricken's conception, this ORTBO was an elaborate, complex production to get Mark and Helly to hook up. It feels unnatural, gross. They deceived Mark using Outie Helly to play him. Lumon knows that love is dangerous to their cult, that Mark's love for his wife gives him a purpose greater than following Kier. So what better way to bring him back to worshipping the Eagan cult than to manipulate him into falling in love with Helly? How deep their plan goes with this whole Mark, Helly, and Gemma love triangle, I'm not really sure yet. Do you think they intend for Helly to get pregnant? Is it possible that Helly was not totally faking it and has some real feelings for Mark? And what about Mark just jumping into bed with Helly? He sees Gemma's face glitch in while he's with Helly, indicating reintegration sickness, right? So if this is reintegrated Mark, it doesn't make sense that he would sleep with her after finding out Gemma is alive. Which makes me wonder, Does the switch still happen when you're in Lumen territory? We still don't really have a good understanding of what reintegration really looks like. Maybe there's something to learn from this reintegration sickness too. Going back to the radio analogy, if you try to play two stations at once, it turns into noise. Like with Petey's reintegrated memories, he lives them as if they were happening real time, but what he experiences doesn't really make sense. Just like hearing two songs at once, you might catch bits of the lyrics or melody, but the rest is just noise. What's interesting to me is that these memory flashes look like his two realities are glitching back and forth, which we also saw with Mark's reintegration, as well as the same glitching we saw on the TV during the ORTBO introduction. And yes, I know, also similar to The Matrix.
What is it?
A deja vu is usually a glitch in the Matrix. It happens when they change something.
So is this to suggest Lumen can create these glitches in the same way? Syncing Innie and Outie brainwaves in such a way to trigger real-life visualizations like the TV. And perhaps it means these images must come from memory. And let's not forget the instrument Miss Huang was playing, the Theremin, created in the 1920s. It's a unique instrument where you don't touch anything physically to play it, but instead you use your hands to control sound frequencies. It's a perfect analogy for how Lumen manipulates the Innie's brainwaves, like the radio equalizer, to create the vibe they want for control. The sound of the instrument is eerie too, almost uncanny, and it sets the perfect tone for Milchek's campfire ghost story.
And he reached up to grasp at his hair, which was suddenly moss that tore easily from his bleeding scalp.
It's a strange instrument for a young girl to have mastered, which also seems like a hint that Huang might just be an older soul transferred in that young body. And we can't end this video without talking about my man Irving. He's the real MVP in this episode, but he's acting like a totally different person. He's paranoid, questioning everything, doubting Helly's story, thinking Dylan's talking behind his back, and getting so suspicious of Lumen that he suggests they might need to eat a rotting seal corpse that they found in the woods, in case they aren't given any food. Something I think a soldier might think about in a survival situation. But hold that thought. Later, Helly teases him with a seal she made of snow, which feels pretty mean, especially given how on edge Irving is. I think it only fuels his suspicions about her, but what's more interesting is that this is now the second seal connected to Irving. One light, one dark. His Outie is a Navy SEAL, which I think this all points to Irving's Outie identity as a SEAL seeping in, or maybe he too is reintegrated now. Now, after he confronts Helly about who her Outie really is, he runs off into the woods. And just like Ricken's story, he has a revelation, a dream after falling asleep in the snow. In this dream, he's his usual Innie MDR self, the version Lumen wants him to be, molded in Kier's image. But then he sees Bert and Woe's bride, a representation of his dark side, his Dieter, the part of him driven by love to reject the Lumen way. In his dream, he's working on a file called Montauk, a nod to the real-life Montauk Project, a conspiracy theory about government mind control experiments and exotic research like time travel and parallel universes, which opens up a whole nother can of worms on what Lumen's doing. As Dream Irving looks at his computer, the numbers shift into what looks like Helly's image, her face made up of the scary numbers that MDR sorts, representing her part in Lumen's psychological experiments. As he sees her image, Woe's bride suddenly jump scares him, almost like she's about to consume him. The dream symbolizes Woe overtaking him, his emotions, his rebellion, his love for Bert overpowering Lumen's control. And Helly in this vision represents the face of that control, the oppressor standing in the way of his love. Just like Kier did to Dieter, Irving drowns Helly in the hollow, baptizing her, washing away her sins until she emerges reborn as her Innie self. And in doing so, Irving also sacrifices himself, becoming a martyr like Dieter as well.
that?
It's milkshake. Remove the Glasgow block now.
And this is where we learn about the Glasgow block, a control mechanism Lumon uses to override the Severance chip's automatic location switch. It allows Helly to enter the severed locations without triggering her Innie. Now, back in Season 1, when Dylan was activating the overtime contingency, we got a snapshot of different controls or settings for the Severance chip. Irving also yells "hang in there" to Dylan, a bit of a corny line reminiscent of elementary school inspirational posters. And what do you know, Lumon has this very quote posted in the new break room. The poster is an image of Dylan hanging between the two controls in the security room, where he activated the OTC. Irving is sending Dylan a message that maybe he can use the controls to bring his Innie back, or perhaps figure out the other controls to use against Lumon. Who knows how many more settings they have, but one I found interesting to point out is the beehive, another reference to Ricken's bees. And get this, there is also a bee poster in the break room, "Be ever merry." And so I leave you with one final thought, one thing I keep coming back to. How much in control is Lumon really? We know they are pretty thorough, having a process outline for every scenario. You would think that there would be some sort of emergency safe word or protocol Helly could initiate if things were getting a little hectic while undercover. Like when Irving was really pushing her about her lies. Wouldn't that be enough of a warning for Lumon to go to Plan B and keep Helly safe? Did Lumon really get caught with their pants down with Irving almost drowning Helly? Did they allow the Macrodat uprising? I have my thoughts on this, but I really want to hear yours. Please be sure to share your feedback and theories in the comments below. And as always, if you like this video, please consider hitting the like button and be sure to subscribe for more breakdowns. Until next time, toodles.